One very visible error in a dashboard for executives basically undoes solid engineering work that maybe took months. And this is all about then how to create that thick layer of trust. I think about how can I design a system or a structure that creates the environment that allows me to thrive. So it's almost like rigging the game.
Welcome back to Data Reality Check, where data meets the real world. This is your host, Amy Raygada, and this is the podcast where we talk about why good data works and so often fails. Not because the work is bad, but because it never quite lands where decisions are actually made. Today's episode is about painful and a very common pattern. Strong data initiatives, capable teams, promising results, and yet executive support quietly fades. So today's core question is, why do good data initiatives lose executive support? To explore this, I joined by someone who works right at the intersection of data, leadership, and influence, one of my good friends from the data space. Welcome, Kinda Maarry, to the show. How are you today?
Hello, Amy. How are you? I'm very good, very excited to be with you on the show today and to discuss the topic of how to make sure that the data leader's work is recognized. I think all of us find ourselves in this position all time, trying to monetize our initiatives. So I'm very much looking forward to jump right into it.
Thank you. Just to give a little bit of a background of Kinda, she's a head of data at gotphoto.com. She works closely with data leaders and executives, helping bridge the gap between data teams and the people accountable for business outcomes. And what I really appreciate about her perspective is that she doesn't frame buy-in as a persuasion or politics or the Game of Thrones, but as a design problem, a problem of language or framing, of incentives, of timing. So I want to start with something that many data leaders will recognize. An initiative starts usually with a strong executive interest. There is excitement, there is some budget, maybe even visibility, especially now in the AI era. And then slowly the support erodes. From your experience, why does this happen so often, even when the data work itself is solid and is bringing somebody?
So a situation that resonates with most of us, right? And maybe we start and keep it at the basics that everyone knows, and then we evolve it and talk about some of the other dynamics that come into play and cause this outcome, right? And the first basic challenge that I think everyone who's listening to the podcast already knows about is the Big Bang Trap, right? You are planning for huge initiatives where you can very easily end up in sort of a boil the ocean initiative, right? Think about things like platform modernization or creating a single source of truth or building a semantic layer, right? These are all huge initiatives. And if you don't take the time to break them into increments that you can tie to value and communicate on them, that becomes very difficult, right? So this is the Big Bang Trap. One thing that seems also very basic, but I find a lot of teams skip, and to their detriment actually, is something that we all know from our beginnings, right? And that is the baseline. So what is the status quo? And the reason why I always push teams to look at the status quo and to measure it right now is because once you start going into that communication, if you cannot compare it to the baseline, you will never be able to claim that progress and that value that you've unlocked, right? So this is very important. And for some reason, probably deadlines, teams jump right into the execution mode and forget about, okay, where am I starting from? And this really helps with once you start going into the storytelling and the value framing, which leads us then to, okay, the value framing, right? That is the key word and where a lot of us struggle. So more often than not, you'll see data teams basically reporting on their output versus the outcome. And that is the two sides of the coin that we need to differentiate. And one of them, if we end up on the output side, this is where the narrative loses and we lose the support, the buy-in from the executives, right? Because you will never find executives supporting or saying, yes, let's do more data work. It's more about the outcome, right? So when you are talking about the work that your teams are doing, don't talk about the number of models built or the number of dashboards that are refactored, the number of dashboards that you've shipped. And I'm using that word also. And we can double click on that because, again, that mentality is very important. But we can double click on it later on. Some other things as well that maybe doesn't come often to mind is ownership. And the reason for that is we never work in isolation. We always are working with our stakeholders. We want to create value. And we want our work not to be perceived as a data project. Because as soon as it's put into that corner of a data project, you won't be able to influence teams to work with you. And you lose your relevancy because it's a data project. How is that unlocking value for me as well? So these are some of the things that I think play a big role. And then final thought on that. And again, all of us have found ourselves in this situation, one point or the other. But the premise from which you're working on will be detrimental in the sense of whether you can pass that hurdle or not. And that is the point where you lose trust because something failed. And there is going to be this inevitable hiccup, right? You can put all the guardrails, the observability, data quality checks, you name it. There's going to be something that slips by. And if that layer of trust that you've created is not thick enough so that it's only a small dent and you can recover, then it breaks, right? And then basically one very visible error in a dashboard for executives basically undoes solid engineering work that maybe took months, right? And this is all about then how to create that thick layer of trust. And product mindset plays a big role here.
I completely agree, that I wrote the book about data products because I believe that, first of all, you need to find a real use case or a real problem to fix. And that is easier to show value, right, to the people that is actually most of the times funding you, or it influences a way to get money back, right, so they can keep funding your data initiatives. But from your experience and what you have seen in several organizations, what usually breaks first? The results, the narrative, or the connection to what executives actually care about? Because you put it very well. A lot of companies is like, okay, I have my Ferrari nobody drives, right? I have this beautiful platform. What do you do with that if you don't have real use cases? What do you think it breaks first?
The pattern that I see more often than not is the disconnect in the connection. And you see a disconnection between what you are building and the decision that you are trying or the value that you're unlocking. Once there's this disconnect, typically that happens because your narrative is broken, right? The data story that you are pushing out, you're trying to sell it and it's not landing because you're probably not tying it up to the value that you're trying to unlock. So if you're ever in a meeting and one of the executives are sitting and wondering, why should I care about this? What kind of, how is this work helping me make this decision this month, right? If they are in this so what mode, that's the point in time where this connection is failing, and it's failing because of the narrative. And even if you're doing solid work, the corner that we all get stuck in then is even if the results are right, they get questioned, right? So because you've lost their trust. So it's why is it taking too long? They're not interested necessarily into understanding the complexities, even if you're doing a very good job in translating and abstracting that complexity. If they're missing that, so what? You will not be relevant. They will not take the time to understand why they should care to begin with, right? Because it's not relevant for them. And so that's where I see that pattern typically moving out. So it's the connection because of the narrative breaking. And then ultimately, unfortunately, the results as well gets questioned a lot of the time.
Yeah, that's what you said about the trust, right? Without trust, you won't go anywhere because, yeah, you can maybe, as you said, have this beautiful dashboard with all the business metrics, but one error will bring down your credibility most of the times, right? Because like, what were you doing with all the money we gave you that you are giving me this data that doesn't
Mm,
match what I need, right? What do you think about now, for example, in the era of AI, which is crazy, the amount of executives that come and say, I want AI, but usually they don't even have a business use case to connect with from the executives. You still
mhm.
need to deliver something. You kind of know that probably is going to fail because they haven't even checked on what exactly the business needs. What are your thoughts in this narrative now with the AI world that is basically in a rush?
It's reminding me of the era of big data, right? When everyone started understanding, okay, data is, and back in the day, that was the analogy, data is the new oil. And then everyone started hoarding data. And then you would get CEOs, clients coming in and saying, here's the data, do something with it, right? And that was every data scientist had that problem of, okay, what do you want me to do with it? And they're like, yeah, it's data. I want my competitive advantage, right? And that is difficult because you need to understand where your business needs to go, right? And at least from the executive level or from the functions that want to unlock particular use cases, they need to take the time to understand the challenges that they have, what they are pushing towards, and work together with their data partner to understand, all right, what can we do with that? I mean, they don't necessarily need to, or they do not need to know the solution. This is also a symptom that we typically see is typically the business and a lot of the business teams and executives, they come with the solution rather than the problem, right? And so they are throwing AI on it because it's the new promise to unlock all of the problems that you have. And a lot of the use cases, if use cases come our way, you end up thinking, okay, you don't need to use AI on that. You can use actually classical machine learning. So going back to your point around not knowing what to do with the data, it is, I think, our job whenever we are faced with a request like that to push back and to give them room and also prompt them with questions to understand what is it that they're trying to resolve. And that comes with these why questions and digging further and further, because more often than not, they are stuck in a particular solution space, whereas you want to get into the actual challenge, the actual value that would unlock for them. So I would see myself there in that position of navigating them to figure out their goal, the blocker that they have, the value that we can unlock for them. And then, however, we want to be tackling it in the back end, whether it's AI, whether it's ML, whatever it is, then it's up to us. And then we can recommend how we move forward there.
Yeah, and that's such a difficult topic, right? Because they are into this FOMO mode for some reason. And I actually,
Yeah.
as always, talking to you is so refreshing because you understand this. But I talk with
Mm.
a lot of head of data, because of the nature of my job. And most of them, the priority is to have AI, so the CIO or the CDO is happy. And and again, something that you mentioned a lot is the language, right? How we communicate things. And I feel like we need this role either a head of data like you to understand business value and can separate between technology, right? Or a data product manager, for example, that can have these conversations, these difficult conversations between business and tech, because data teams often will talk about models and pipelines and quality and architecture and I don't know, algorithms. And the executives is like, I want outcomes. I need the risk. I need growth and the timing. And timing is now. From your perspective, how big of a role does this language mismatch play in losing this executive support? If you have like all these fancy words and even on LinkedIn, they are influenced by these words, but they don't really understand what they mean, right? From the executive side.
Mm-mm. So the mismatch, it's a huge problem, right? As soon as you have two people in the room and they're not speaking the same language or they're not addressing each other's, and in that case, what the organization is trying to do, then they will never be able to be in that mode of unlocking value and getting to the root of the actual problem, right? And at that point, especially in a data leadership position, you're losing trust and you're losing the sponsorship, right? Because again, you're looked at as a cost center. They don't understand what you're doing. They're not investing. They don't want to they don't want to invest time to understand that complexity because they're seeing you as, okay, you're doing something that I don't understand, right? And so we need to step up, and if they are not coming in with very clear objectives as to what it is that they're trying to do. So, for instance, it could be, all right, this year our target is the enterprise customers, and we're going to be doing personalized marketing, and this is what we do. And then you start connecting the strategy that they have with what data points would you need, and trying to understand, okay, how can we create a data product or provision you with the data that is necessary to unblock you or to enable you to do that work. Right? This is where you need to go. Now, that is one thing around the mismatch. To the other point, because and correct me if I'm wrong, if I misunderstood the question, but it seemed like two questions in one, right? So this is the question of the mismatch of us not being, or a lot of data leaders not being in a state where they can do that proper value framing and make sure that we're staying away from the technicalities. We are abstracting, but without oversimplifying. We're showing what is the value that we're unlocking. This is one mismatch. And then there's the other mismatch that you talked about, which is this FOMO of we need to do something around AI. And this might be coming either from the board or the executives or also from the data leader. And if they're coming from the board or at the executive level, that's something to be expected as well. I mean, we know that there's a lot of potential and huge competitive advantage. And if you don't go there quickly, you might put yourself in a risk depending on the competition that you have, right? Because there are companies that are already in a very strong position. And so the question is, do we need to jump and do stuff in-house versus wait until things stabilize and then take that, right? That's a completely different conversation. But if it's coming from the executive and the board, then what you can influence is, and if this is not already something that's happening, is to have conversation, open the communication channels, workshops, trying to understand what are the different use cases that are there in all of the different functions, right? I don't focus on the solution again, right? Because I've been in some of those workshops where it is oriented into AI. And a lot of the outcomes that come in where you start prioritizing based on the value it would unlock, again, it was not really AI, it was machine learning. But from a data leadership perspective, I'm happy that, okay, these workshops happened because I can show, okay, these are the priorities that you want. This is what's going to unlock most value for you. It's not with AI, it's going to be ML, but that's fine because this is what you need right now for the business, right? And you can talk about that once you have this strategy and you can show these are all the things that we have right now. This is the strategy. This is the value that is going to be unlocked. These are the dependencies. It's very easy to put their mind at ease because they see what will drive us forward, right? This is the FOMO that is coming from executives and the board. And if you look at from our end on the data leadership side, again, I cannot put it in a negative way, right? We are data people, and obviously we want to stay within the cycles of innovation. We need to stay as well on top of things, right? And again, there, the mindset is with the tools that are out there, or with the AI and agentic AI tools that we have in the company, or with the skill set that we have within my team to build or to create these agents, what are the top use cases, the top challenges that are spanned across all of the stakeholders, and where can we help, right? So you always see it comes down to the value framing, where we can unlock most value. And it's all about understanding as well the constraints of the company, right? So what is the company interested in right now? Is it risk management? Is it growth? Is it cost, right? So there's different buckets depending on the stage that the company is moving in. And this is, again, also tied up at the end to the value or the value framing that you're doing, right? But at the end of the day, it's all about understanding what are the potential use cases that you have, the challenges, prioritizing them, and then start working on them in increments and show the value. That's at the end of the day, that's what it all revolves around. How can we unlock value for the business and not just do the engineering work for the fun of doing the engineering work?
I completely agree. Unfortunately, I have seen that this is not the case in a lot of organizations, which
Mm,
is sad because we talk about it quite often openly in the
mm,
data space, right? Like value, value, value is always there, but no one seems to follow that route because I will give you an example. I was a few months ago in one engagement where some people wanted, uh, we want agentic AI because the competitors have agentic AI and we don't care how we get there. We just want to have in our website powered by AI.
mm,
But okay, let's do an AI strategy because they said, okay, we want to revamp our AI strategy because we've been working on this already for more than a year and we haven't been able to deploy anything into production. It was okay.
mm,
So it was an initiative with product, with engineering, and some data people. And when I arrived there, what I first found that it's like, okay, they invested already millions of pounds in this initiative, but they didn't take care of the foundations, right? Like,
mm,
okay, having a good data quality, having a good setup of data products. Even the people who they were saying, okay, we are data scientists, but we are just researchers. So
mm,
they
mm.
just put some software engineers to create whatever they experimented with, but even the data they were using for experiments were not 100%, quality driven. And they were just like struggling with this a lot because they couldn't deploy, and there were things to take into consideration. For example, is the data protection person is going to approve this, because now there are more regulations and more stuff, right? Is the data ready, like the metrics that we need, because they wanted to do some kind of
Mm.
Monday morning dashboard for the people who consumes the data. We're a B2B kind of company, and use AI. And I'm like, why are you using, as you said, why would you use agentic AI? We could
Mm.
use just your ML models. You've already been running there for years.
Yes.
And yeah, maybe you can use something to expose them differently in a nice way in the UI, but there's no need to go to agentic because you are not prepared at all. And you see these companies throwing away money, and the return of investment, I see it like in the next couple of years when the bubble bursts is going to be probably negative or zero, because having agentic is so expensive and you can resolve it with basic models. Like really, you don't have to go agentic. You most of the times you don't need it. and
Yes.
and that's crazy how the executive push and they inject the money, and even the data people get sidetracked, and they just have some maybe software engineers or somewhere that are like doing something in the front end. Oh yeah, we can do it, and that's it. And that's also another of the problems, right? Like pushing away data people and just trying to do something with other teams.
Yeah, I think it's again, a lot of people will hear that story and reflect on it and will find themselves as well there, right? This is not a new topic, right? And we've been talking for over a decade around if you're in data leadership position, you need to reframe the work that you're doing, move away from the outputs and think about the value framing. And I think maybe the misalignment is not only on that level, but what you talked about, the foundation, right? Because if the foundations is shaky, and I'll give some examples of what that foundations is, no matter what you do to salvage the work that you're doing underneath with the narrative, with the data story, you will never be able to salvage it and it will never work in your favor. And you might be able to salvage it on the short term by overpromising something that will not work out. But then that will come back and it will be not good for you, right? Because you're going to be losing trust if you cannot commit to that. But I think the misalignment, and this is something that if you're not getting the data story and the narrative correct, but you're doing everything on the foundation level correct, then it's much easier to work on that data story. But if the foundation is incorrect, so think about how you approach uh, an initiative, right? How you're prioritizing. Right? We talked about this. If you find yourself prioritizing things in isolation and you're not talking to the stakeholders and you're not asking them about the challenges, this is a symptom, right? If your data platform team are thinking about, and this is the classical tool first behavior, right? We need something, we're going to go and they instantly jump into the vendor market and they start talking about to the vendors doing the demos without even understanding what is the problem, who are my stakeholders, what are the use cases, what are the nice to have versus must have features, right? All of this is symptoms of how we've been working as data teams. And regardless of how you want to flip that narrative on that new tool that you're bringing in that is disconnected from whatever the business needs to do, you will never be able to salvage that misalignment on the communication level. So we need to step deeper and rethink. And we don't need to rethink because that rethinking and that way of bringing product thinking to data has been now around for a couple of years. But it's a matter of putting that into implementation. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to build data products in the way that Jamak envisioned it, but it's about bringing that product thinking into play, looking at the who, the why, managing it in a way that there's a constant feedback loop, looking at the adoption rather than shipping, right? And I did mention that shipping word purposely at the beginning because that's, again, one of those foundational things. If the way you're testing, if the way you're measuring the success of your team is based on how many dashboards you've created, or how many models you've created the past month, then the mentality is that shipping. And it's not about the value. It's not about who needs it and for what and is it working or not. You're shipping and you don't care how is it being used, right? So it's a completely different foundation that we're starting from. And this needs to be right for your communication to be right and to be aligned with the business. And I think this is where perhaps a lot of the conversations are focusing on the communication without tying it back to, okay, you need to get that right. And then the storytelling will be much easier to nail in.
Yeah, I completely agree because in this case, for example, was product pushing because they wanted to push right this narrative of we are agentic driven.
Mm-hmm.
And the tech people, while we were doing the gig, right, they knew that they needed more than just a shiny name, right? They needed to build up those foundations. But then there is conflict of interest between product and tech, right? And they were not able to understand none of the. I mean, I think I did actually. That was very frustrating. We did a workshop, right, to identify the use cases. Then we figured out they already have some UX research team, which is very important because then you're able to keep what it really matters, as you mentioned, right? What is going to be used, what it ties the narrative with investment and so on. But they were not using that because they were like, those are boring use cases. We want something like a wow use case. We want a wow use case that everybody's just wow. But what do you mean by a wow use case if you don't even have these foundations, right? And during the workshop, I divided teams, okay, between technology and product. And I'm like, okay, what are your use cases and blah, blah, blah.
Mm.
And what do you think that you need? What are the risks and so on? When we came back, right, I was, every team needed to present. The tech team presented, okay, I think we need better data quality. I think we need better data products. So, so we're sort of a data product, better data platform, better data security and foundations because we don't understand that at all because we are software engineering is trying to break through here. We need organization because right now it's just one tech lead trying to organize things that nobody knows what it is, right? Or what they exactly want to get out of it. And then when I got to product, they talk, and the tech team talk about the use cases from this UX research. And when I went to the product people, they didn't do the job at all that I asked for during the workshop. They were like, actually, we got bored about these questions that you put in there, and we decided to come out with wow use cases and come up with new ideas. And I was like, okay, this is not what we are trying to do here. We're trying to bring from the very beginning, from what you have available at this moment, what can you do? Because maybe you want to have I don't know, a marketplace, a meta agent of marketplace, right? But that is not possible with what you have today. And it's this FOMO, I think before was the data teams wanting to scale with data, fancy data platforms, fancy this, fancy that, and explain the product why they needed this. And now it's actually product thinking that they already have all that they never funded. and trying to push them on that direction that doesn't make any sense. So now product knows better what tech can do. And now I think the roles are shifting a little bit, because it's not the first time I see these. And it's so difficult to tie this narrative because product is supposed to care about what the clients or the customers wants, what are the real use cases. But if they just worry about like we are losing competitive advantage and we are getting behind, that's also not the mentality, right?
This should never be the driving factor, right? I think there's a lot of uncertainty around Gen AI and agentic AI in the sense of what it can do and what it will mean as well to the workforce, that I think everyone wants to get their hands on it. But at the end of the day, and this is my belief, leadership needs to step up and also set a role model, basically, right? If you have these dynamics within a company where the goal is to have something that is shiny but is not necessarily bringing the company to where it wants to be, I think leadership needs to step up and have and set a role model there, right? Because then it's very hard on the data leadership level, especially if you are head to head on that, unless you are putting. And this brings us into actually a situation where a lot of data leaders find themselves, which is you need to influence, but you don't have that authority, right?
Mm.
And this is a tricky place to be in. And I also think a lot of people think about, when we talk about influencing without authority, a lot of people think about, okay, this is about me having the perfect story, going and convincing people, right? And I think about it differently. I think about, how can I design a system or a structure that creates the environment that allows me to thrive. So it's almost like rigging the game, let's say, right? So I'll give a few examples. So if you think about putting ownership into place, right? So, and let's take an example of standardizing metrics, right? Data teams can never do that on their own, right? The definition needs to come from the business teams. So you come and you set the structure, right? This is going to be the owner. We're going to be building the model. If there is a problem in the definition, it's clear who's the owner and who needs to work on that, right? Once you put in these structures in place, it becomes clear who's the owner, what are the dependencies, who's owning the use case, who's pushing for that. So that's a system that you put into place. And if something fails, then you can easily talk about, okay, what are we owning from that part of the system? And what are the dependencies? What are the blockers? So when someone comes in and say, why is it taking too long? You can easily show, because of the structure in the system that you put into place. And then this is where your influence comes into play, because you've already kind of set in some rules, right? And made it visible as well to leadership or whoever is interested or invested in that success. And so people start stepping up because you've put in the right visibility into play, right? That's one example of how you could basically try and shape the environment that you're in, so that the influence that you're putting in is not only based on the conversations, the one-on-one conversations that you can have with teams or with people or with peers, and convince them that this is the right way to do. But I think it's a tricky position to be in. And sometimes you can make it work from your position, but sometimes, and I think in the situation that you're describing, to be honest, I think here you need that role model setting in terms of, okay, what do we want to do? How do we want to position ourselves as an organization? Sometimes it might be useful to have a shiny use case for PR reasoning, for instance, right? But it depends. What is it that you want to do? And this has to come then from leadership.
And if you have the capabilities to build it, right? Because if you don't have the right skills, the right tech, the right knowledge, you will
100%.
fail miserable, right? And you will lose
Yeah.
trust and credibility, but from your clients, especially if you're a B2B, right? Or if you have, if it's a facing a client product that you are delivering, that you're going to get reviews, you're going to be like exposed in different things if you're a big company and you're important, right? Um, I want to move a little bit towards data governance. That's another difficult topic. No one wants to own it. No one wants to work with it because it takes long time to establish something. You and me know how it is. How do we build trust with these executives over time, especially when these initiative of governance, of compliance, and so on had so little tangible outcomes over time, right? I mean, it's a huge impact for the organization, but it's not something that you can measure specifically with ROI like other initiatives.
Yeah. So this is a tricky one, to be honest. And it's tricky because, like you said, you cannot necessarily connect it to Roy, right? Because it's a longer distance. Unless you are going at it from the risk side, from the compliance side, then it's a bit of an easier let's say, narrative that you can push, right? And over the past years as well, and there's this official website as well around the fines that are given, and you see a trend that is slowly going up with some of the bigger players on the markets that seem to be untouchables that are getting these fines, and then you can look at your own sector and build a case on that. So if you're building the case specifically on data governance from the compliance perspective, then it can become a bit easier, but still it's one of those areas of work where so long as you're doing the work, that's fine, no one's complaining. It people start looking at it when there is a fire, right? But some things that definitely help is breaking things into increments, right? We talked about this, measuring the baseline, having some of those leading indicators, taking agency and doing the PR on the key wins that you have. And one of the challenges with data governance is most of the tactics that people have been using over the past decades, again, follow this big bang approach. Whereas what you should be doing, again, is through that use case pathway. And I'll give an example, right? Let's think about a scenario where you have this weekly KPI dashboard, and this is what the whole executives look at every Monday morning, and the numbers are continuously inconsistent, right? And you deep dive a little bit, and then you understand, oh, the KPI definitions are inconsistent because there's many different definitions out there, and no one really knows what single source of truth should be used to calculate that metric from it, right? So one entry point for this from a data governance or data management perspective, let's take the data catalog role here, is all right, we actually need to make sure that people know exactly which KPI definition they should be using, what is the query, what is the table they should be using, and document the edge use cases. And there's no place for that. And so you start documenting those KPIs, right? And this is how you start your data catalog. Just that, and don't open up the whole thing. Small increments. And these are the foundations that you can sneak in for that particular use case. So your use case is going to be, we have those core numbers that you're losing trust. You cannot base decisions on them. And we're going to resolve that. And we're going to do that through that and that. So very small increments. I think another thing as well that we can do to also build trust is being proactive and taking agency once you've reached that level where you're asked about use cases are coming to you, right? Without you going out and asking them. That's, by the way, a very good sign because that means you're setting up the right reputation. Is always communicating as well, even if they're not coming in and telling you, when can you do this? For you to estimate it. And again, thinking about managing and prioritizing with that cross-functional view of all the stakeholders that you have, to prioritize that and then commit to a date and deliver on that. And this is how you build credibility over time, right? It's this continuous, it's almost like a compounding effect, right? The more you deliver on what you've promised, the more that credibility account or layer gets thicker. And the more you can start pushing for things that are harder to also explain because they're more complicated or the foundations cannot be sneaked in through use cases. But you need to start somewhere. And somewhere is those small success stories that are tied up to use cases. Sneak in the foundations there, build more credibility. And don't stop at that one use case where you had a lot of visibility and thinking that that will be enough. I think that's also something that a lot of us think, okay, we've done this, now we can start doing our own thing. And that's something that I think we need to reiterate on continuously, right? Recommitting and delivering on these success stories.
I completely agree with you on that slice and dice, right?
Yeah.
Or divide and conquer, let's say that way.
Yeah.
Because when I have done, implementations of data governance or data management, I usually also recommend to go with one use case with one data product, for example. In that data product, you put around the governance, right? And this is the first one. It's just one, as you said, it's easy. You do data catalog, you do, for example, computational governance, some automations, and so on. And you start with one thing that shows value because it shows at least acceleration or maybe process improvement or maybe, I don't know, compliance in some way somehow. Instead of what you said, the big bang, like, okay, we're doing data products, and I have heard people that is like, okay, we have 350 data products, and then you're like, okay, cool, and then you check, right, and these basically tables rename as data products, but that's it. And I see that a lot, right? Better to do one thing well done that 350 that doesn't make any sense.
100%. And I think as well, when it comes to data products, as soon as you say 350, I'm already doubting if this is a data product, right? Um, and I see that trend as well. When you look at the data set that a company has, you will have a long tail of data that is barely giving you any value. And then there you need to put in you can only think about, is it relevant for compliance reasons or not, and protect yourself putting it on backups. Then you're going to find a bulk of information that is unlocking a lot of value for the specific departments that they're in. And then you're going to find this, it's almost like an 80-20 um, distribution. That this 20% at the top, that is where you should be focusing and prioritizing and investing your effort in. You cannot invest your effort in building all the data that you have into data products if you want to do data products in the correct way. You need to be very precise as to what is you're choosing to invest your time in, because it is going to be a bit of work, right? It is about the whole the pre-work of understanding what is out there, what are the use cases, what is the value that is being unlocked, building the product, and then the whole adoption, the whole feedback mechanisms, the maintenance, right? So it's not just the building. There is almost like two loops, one in front of building the data product and then the continuous loop afterwards, up to the point where you sunset a data product. And so you have to be very intentional what data products you're going to build. Otherwise, you end up with 350 tables that are
Exactly.
renamed to data product.
Yeah, I completely agree. You know that I have this human-centered data product design, the fifth chapter of my book, and it's about this, right? How important is the feedback loop? Because I have seen in many cases that people is like, okay, here is the data products, the 350 ones. They don't iterate on that, and of course, that's why we have versioning of data products, right? Because they evolve over time as well. Maybe, I mean, I have been also in the case that when one column get dropped from the back end of the system from software engineers, and then that affect the data product. But now, because we have a data product, we're able to trace where the bug is and fix it and talk to them, and then maybe put a data contract on top or something. But before, I remember that happened to us in a previous company that I worked. And it took to the data engineers like 3 weeks to figure it out what exactly happened and why this data was not common. And it was basically just they drop a column, they told anyone because who cares about the data team, right? Anyways. And then it's like, yeah, everything is broken, sales is complaining, there is pain everywhere. And again, is if you put this in the right direction, right, you can avoid these costly errors, as you said, that has trust. That also is a product. If it's a sales dashboard, for example, is super important. That you need, and you need to have these leads, this information going to see what is going on for marketing, for sales, for whatever you need it, right? And this is, I think, a difficult one that I think we're getting better over time in getting more, let's say, product driven, but still a lot of confusion between what is a data product versus what is data as a product versus what is just 350 tables. being called a data product. And I want actually to connect this more into the data product perspective. Um, when data is treated as a product, right, it changes how the value is discussed around it, how it's measured, how it's owned, and so on. From your perspective, how does product thinking help data leaders to have better conversations with executives?
I think it changes the whole conversation from the get-go, just because, and if you remember, we talked about the foundations being incorrect, and if the foundations are incorrect, you can never tweak that narrative. Now, the foundations and the essence of a data product is all about the who and the why, right? So who are my stakeholders? How are they going to be using it? How can I design it so it unlocks value to as many use cases as possible, right? And so as you are designing that data product, you are already, in fact, designing or getting the right input for your narrative as well, right? So it changes completely the conversation because you are already operating from a completely different mindset, which is how can I unlock the best user experience, the best value for my stakeholders? You're treating them as your customers, basically. And then that also comes into play when you're prioritizing, because it is about, okay, you are bringing in portfolio strategy. You have so many different use cases and you can only manage as much. So you need to put the right bets on the data products that will unlock the most value, right? So you're moving from this ticket queue mindset into this portfolio strategy, right? And when you think about the foundations of putting data quality or documentation or lineage, these are by nature then translated into features of your product, right? So quality becomes trust, documentation, lineage becomes basically usability. So the way you are designing a data product and the way you publish it and maintain it afterwards changes the narrative because you're changing the whole way that you're operating from. And then the story comes naturally. You don't even need to repack it because it's already around the value frame, right? So it changes the conversation from the very beginning.
Yeah, I completely believe that because it passes to be just a technical asset to decision support asset, right? So it, as you
Exactly.
said, it shifts the mentality and how you see it, how you maintain it, how you take care of it, and you quickly see value on it. If you're a business person, right, that you don't have to be dealing, as you mentioned before. Okay, we have 5 metrics and the same definition, and they have different ways of calculations, but all of them are defined the same. So which one is the source of truth?
And it's the beauty of it once you have that portfolio as well is that you have the natural setup for this compounding system that we were talking about to build that credibility, right? Because with every new product, data product that you add, you're building more and more leverage as well, right? Because it unlocks more and more value. So it's definitely a different way of working. And I see it as the only salvation for us from being in that corner of doing the data work and being disconnected from the business. We need to change the whole way that we're operating with. And then the story and the narration will come easily, will flow from that.
Yeah, one of these days I was talking, recording an episode with Tom Bretman, and he's, like data starts with people mindset, right? And we were talking about data products and why data products, you cannot bring the same people from data, but bring people with fresh mentality. Like one of the things that I say all the time is like, we already have all these methodologies. We are not reinventing the water. This happens already in software engineering. Just bring these best practices, right? Like, why don't we bring? I have a lot of product managers writing me, like, how do I become a data product manager? Because they are afraid that they need to learn SQL or they need to learn Python and they need to be, I don't know, a machine learning person. And I tell them, no, you already have all the skills that we need because we need people who starts conversations, who drives a project, as you mentioned before, a portfolio management, right? To check those use cases and manage them as a portfolio and prioritize them and implement them and see the consumer as a client, right? As a customer that you serve, that you want to provide, that you want to have also good feedback, right? Out of it and improve it. So I really like what you said, this portfolio management, because that's so true. But we need people with fresh mentality that is not the same tech people that will believe only the tech is important, or that is not really interested in evolve this in a product thinking perspective, which happens a lot, right? If you're too technical, you want to live in your bubble and not talk with the business, because that happens to me a lot. Like, can I talk to the business people to understand use cases? And then it's like,
Mhm.
oh no, we don't talk to the business people. They hate us. They really
Mm,
hate us. They don't want to have conversations with us. And I'm like, okay, why? Yeah, because they cannot understand. And I'm like, okay, but if they come and talk about, again, a lot of data platform things, and they are like, okay, I don't know what you're talking, and the other ones talk about business, but the other ones doesn't understand, then again we go back to the beginning, we get this disconnection, right? And of course, a business person embedded in data teams is super important, or at least not not a business person. I mean, I'm technical. I'm a technical person, but I believe that I could bridge this gap. And that's why I move into strategy, governance, and so on over time. So it could be also technical people that decided to move
mhm,
towards that way. But we need more product thinking, I believe, in data.
mhm. And to be honest as well, with the pace of innovation and Gen and agentic AI, the entry barrier on being technical will get lower and lower. It is getting lower and lower. And the people who step up right now and get that skill set of speaking to people, understanding the use cases, understanding those intricacies that are not documented somewhere, at least for the for the foreseeable future, these are going to be the skill sets that sets you apart. If you can translate and understand how you can connect both worlds, because building a pipeline or writing code, we're already seeing AI doing very good job on it, and we're seeing now our software engineers, our data engineers, not coding, they are reviewing, right? And it's only going to get better and better. So it's very important for us more than ever to, if we're not there yet at that skill set, to cultivate that.
I completely agree with you, because I repeat this a lot. Probably I sound like a broken record, but I love to remember the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory with Johnny Depp, and the father, that gets fired from this factory, where he was just putting like toothpaste caps. And then at the end of the movie, he gets rehired, but actually as the mechanic who fixed the machine. And this is what we need to move towards, right? To, as you said, evolve the skills and talking to people, understanding the needs, and shaping the next projects in the right way to produce value out of it, as is definitely gold. It's going to be gold.
100%.
Before we wrap up, I have two questions for you. So, first, what's one thing data leaders should stop doing if they want to maintain executive support?
I think that's a perfect wrap up, because it basically accumulates everything that we're talking about. If it's the one thing, right? When you're approaching any initiative that you're working on, don't treat it as a big bang, treat it as increments, tie it to the value that you're unlocking, and continuously communicate on the progress that you're doing, right? And this is the one thing that you should do. And so the opposite, you should stop doing, right? And that is the big bangs, that is big, vague initiatives where you're not really able to get the executive support in, because it's basically blind faith up front that you're asking for. Things like, I'm building the foundations, I'm modernizing the platform. It's not going to work out. So increments that are tied to value.
So I stopped doing Big Bang. And a second one, what is one belief about executive buy-in that sounds logical, but is actually holding data initiatives back?
I think one that is not talked about enough is, once you get that first success story and you have the feeling that you've earned their buy-in and support, that you stop doing that. And it's a continuous effort that you need to do. And it even gets tougher. So that's first buy-in is good because you come in already and people have belief in you and trust, just a human nature. But the continuous reinforcement, that is something that I think a lot of people after some time they get comfortable in it because they think, okay, I've cultivated that relationship and I have that as an ally. And then a couple of dents come into that layer of trust. And it's easy to forget the amount of work that is coming in, right? So I think that is something that we should not take for granted. And we need to continuously reinforce that buy in and renew it.
Yeah, I love something that you said in the middle of the podcast about these when your customers come alone asking for more, right? And I think that's important about doing this PR. Like, okay, look, today we help the monetization team. Maybe some, I don't know, in some company we were even doing like in the lunch rooms there were like screens, and it was like, okay, let's put there, it was an idea, right? Let's put there, for example, okay, the story of the week. We had the monetization team doing this and that, or we had the marketing team now help with the data catalog or whatever, some success stories. So other people is like, that might help me. So they can come to you and ask what is the right question, or just going to a meetup with the, I don't know, the company and start asking, what are your pain points? And from there on, you can also offer them, and they will come back to you like, hey, what we spoke in this meeting, I'm interested. What can we do? And that's a way, as you said, not to give for granted that you have the buy-in, but to have a continuous buy-in based on customer or clients' needs.
Absolutely.
Kinda, thank you so much. This conversation really highlights something essential that we take for granted.
Thank you so much, Amy, for having me today. It was an absolute pleasure. And I'm looking forward to hearing the podcast and the other episodes and the other guests. Is always insightful chatting with you.
Same. Just for a closing words, executive buy-in isn't about better slides or louder advocacy. It's about designing initiatives that speak the language of decisions. Data leaders don't just build systems, they design understanding. So you've been listening to Data Reality Check, where data meets the real world. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch up next time with more real talk from the front lines of data and AI. Stay data driven. Bye.
Thank you all. Bye bye.